Witches, the female dark magical wielders set up for the Halloween season. Ever since their troubled ancestors in the Salem Witch Trials, persecuted by paranoid schizophrenics, and before advancements in medicine was invented, witches have evolved and adapted into many forms of media over time, even when creating an occult here and there. The earliest example of a witch I had encountered could be just the Little Witch and her 2 books when I was still just a toddler in the early 90s. Despite those being bullied, whether to solve complicated math problems, wanting civilian rights, intense feminism to the point of misandry, or just being pissed off, witches are classified as women, with warlocks being male, as simply an ominous being that has the skill to fly, use dark magic particularly for hexing or offense, and look old, ugly, and frail, even wearing opaque clothing symbolizing death and the dark arts. Still though, witches are very iconic for Halloween, as much as pumpkins, bats, and the undead, and sometimes cool and sympathetic from their haunted past. I hope I won't be condemned on highlighting my other Halloween games, despite the console craze. I felt unmotivated and mostly trapped in a world of anxiety. So I hope you don't mind this sudden tangent detour. They were just easy to work with, and I happen to be a woman and perhaps a cursed soul. They can just be the descendants of those unfortunate souls long ago, manifesting into the same darkness on how brutal maniacs treated them. Good? Bad? There's some fun to be had. Fly, my pretties! Alright, let's start from an unorthodox and very eerie early choice, which happens to be part of the 8-bit era, and one of the RPGs my older sis specializes in, Dragon Warrior. When it comes to creepiness and feared enemies, this might as well be the distant past champion. There are countless examples of powerful, sinister enemies that can bring a chill down your spine. Even the music itself. And one such classification of baddies are the magicians. Within that one group, there are 3 other subgroups. And just like any early RPG or Nintendo game, there's always going to be palette swaps. Each member more powerful than the last. The earliest encounters the magicians who are encased in grey hooded cloaks and are often found either in the overworld or low-level dungeons. Although a lot of guides prompt you to beware, at least until you grind and reach to level 4. By then you can withhold its clenching spells, and also learn the hurt spell to give yourself a better chance. The second species is the Warlock, which is a large maroon step up from its predecessor. As labeled as such, they're more powerful utilizing the hurt and sleep spells, aside having higher HP and offense stats. A stop spell is highly recommended as soon as you encounter them, and are often located within higher leveled locales. The third variant's the white-hooded wizards, which cast hurt more on a frequent basis. Although they're weak physical walls, they can be found within the Dragon Lord's castle, near Hawksness, or beside Cranton. Oof. Just thinking about the deserted, wrecked Hawksnest town can give me the goddamn willies. They're mostly considered as males, including the warlocks, but the other two could just be unisex. And since warlocks are a smaller part of the whole, I can't just discard it. So, with the other two subspecies, I feel the trio of witches still stand. The other two, even just by looking at them, were very sinister sights, since I was around my toddler years. To the point I'm not even touching that accursed installment. No kidding! With their 8-bit omnipotence and their skills that could cause many wall-ups, despite the second being male, this classified species definitely qualifies. Magicka Dispel actually came very late in my life. Stark contrast to 90% of consumers who'd gotten into the NES Capcom game, or the animated series that kickstarted the Disney Renaissance. I wasn't good at games and always gotten stuck in Transylvania with no guide on hand, and always anxious over time limits while constantly being lost in the sauce. But it wasn't until DuckTales Remastered that made the experience as smooth as butter. From there, it was then I learned about Magicka, at least very little since I grew out of Disney. She's an Italian sorceress obsessed on taking Scrooge McDuck's sacred #1 dime in order to attain insatiable wealth. Or perhaps immortality as backstory tales goes. She does work with gangs, but she technically is out for herself, always stationed within the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, Italy, near Naples, and desires to melt that dime within the volcano and absorb its properties via witchcraft to produce her own Midas touch to sustain eternal wealth. I'd much rather prefer to absorb alchemist properties rather than draining people's souls. Hell, it could be just that in the spirit of the coin permitting agelessness and free from disease. Almost a roadway to godhood. She has grown in under a line of duck witches, including her nanny Granny Dispel, her nieces Minima and Stragella, Matilda, her teenage cousin, her other cousin Rosilio, Adelia as her fairy cousin, and even encountered the Wicked Witch of the West, Witch Child, and Warlock. It was very picky, as I only cared about the movies, whether on VHS or Disney Channel, and never became invested in long animated series that abused the reset button. I took matters more seriously and concise. But, thanks to the remastered version of DuckTales, it was almost smooth sailing, despite Magicka's formidability, teleportation, flight, conjuring matter, hexing and hypnotizing, having a wicked abusive nature, and even traveling through time, which ain't common with her kind. Sometimes I wish the Ghost Witch of Detour would be just as respected and as recognizable as this unlucky aggressive duck. The Golden Diva from Wario Land 4 seems like an unorthodox choice, often associated with either opera singers like Helga or a deranged clown. However, when you look past her illusionary appearance and consider her skill set, she still qualifies as an uncommon witch. Her appearance is that of Elizabethan robes, a fan, and multiple kabuki masks made of porcelain, covering her true face. Each of these masks fall off every time she takes damage. The Golden Diva is an opera singer, although time and greed had gradually turned her into a monster. She's the mistress of the mysterious Golden Pyramid that Wario stumbles upon, and she was also the culprit that cursed Princess Shakura into the adorable black cat, which seems unluckier than what the Japanese have you believe, and usurped the pyramid to her own twisted ends, even creating the bosses you'd face throughout and abusing 4 of Shakura's artifacts. As the battle starts, she incapacitates her arch-rival, then Wario makes his move as her masks split into 4, with 3 being translucent and 1 being tangible. And just like very few witches, I think she even manipulates time, as the limits are altered depending on her difficulty, even in the other levels. Once the real deal's taken down, it turns blue and angry, allowing Wario to backfire onto her, just several times before her fans dropped. She can summon her cronies, in which Wario stuns and uses as projectiles. She can also summon Cuckoo Condor's explosive black eggs, which are quite deadly if not handled with extreme caution. After that, she becomes unreachable unless Wario's a spring, then unleashes her fury with a grotesque look and a ground pound similar to many Mario characters, or the chin from ActRaiser, before her body splits and gets decimated, and the goodies are earned. It was one of the best battles Wario Land concocted, and an excellent final battle to boot. It's really flunked up as the Golden Diva is classified as a he, despite being, a diva. And she often reminds me of Asura from Final Fantasy IV, always having different masks and attacks corresponding to them, like a bipolar thing as well as being a queen of her turf. It was tough finding contenders here, but I feel with all those qualities, I'd still consider her to be a decent witch nonetheless. While the magician's considered as the male counterpart, the magicianess is the way of the witch here. One of the few that's actually playable on this list. Drakkhen is so underrated. It was nice customizing different genders for the quartet of classes, and even some of their stats, something early Final Fantasy games lacked. Like any RPG, the magicianess can learn a variety of offensive-defensive spells, while also consuming its point usage, and can master common spells such as Cure, Revive, Fire, healing either to one party member or a group, or even lesser common magic spells such as Speed, which makes you walk faster, Light, which brightens dark places, Unlock, which automatically opens restricted places without finding tricky keys, or even interesting ones such as Antimatter. However, she couldn't make the top 5 since despite her skills, they're most common with weak defense. They consume a lot of magic points. They have the lowest variety of equipment and weapons, limiting to coats, rods, shields, and bow and arrows for covering long range. And sometimes it's not easy moving them away from the fray with the party's automated movements. Despite being close to witches, they're pretty much in the gray area, and there's no option excluding that class. Still, if she gains a lot of experience and often stays in the outfield, it might be smooth sailing. But just like that old adage goes, you can't live with them, yet you can't live without them. Another early contender from my childhood was Mizrabel from the Castle of Illusion. And she definitely has a better concept than with Final Fantasy's Ultimecia. What do I mean by that? Basically, she's obsessed over her beauty and her age, always wanting to stay young and ripe, never caving into the hardships of the elderly years. Can't say I blame her. She debuted in one of my Genesis GOATs, The Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, and she suddenly conjured a scary thunderstorm in the midst of a flowery meadow where Mickey and Minnie frolic. I can relate being startled, but during the chaos, she captures Minnie, just for the sake of stealing her gorgeous essence. Mickey chases her to the haunted Castle of Illusion and finds the 7 gems of the rainbow as he traverses through and battles her illusionary masters. Despite using Mizrabel as a pun, due to absorbing essences to stay young, which was before we had Shang Tsung, by the way, she and the game rather seemed creepy in themselves, especially with me as a damn toddler. And I always found both things to be lost in obscurity. Even though we got the PS3 remake till 2003. Although, since I usually dislike the never say die rule, I'm actually glad that Mizrabel didn't, and just frees her victims from her crumbling castle. If she can redeem herself like Echidna did in The Bouncer, so can she. I had tried the PS3 remake, but just like Strider though, she didn't feel quite as iconic, nostalgic, and ominous as in the Genesis version. And I don't usually follow the epic Mickey series, like her involvement in Power of Illusion, nor have I ever forgotten her and her game. Thus her obsession on escaping Wasteland and stealing other characters' hearts for recognition. I feel sympathetic for her, and she and her game alone, much like Dragon Warrior, were one of several harrowing things in my childhood. No way I'm forgetting her! And I wish people would follow mine and Christian's lead on standing up and praising retro obscure media, instead of just being the greedy modern woke algorithm tools. I'll definitely consider her more over the evil queen from Snow White any day. It doesn't take a genius nor complicated spellcaster to consider Gruntilda as one of the most iconic witches in gaming history. Inspired by the Wicked Witch of the West, I wish that Elphaba and her portrayals would be proud of her. We all know the gist, as Grunty, despite her disgusting habits and tastes, is desperate on stealing Tootie's beauty, according to her trusty Anthro-Cauldron, as the fairest one of all. Of course, this does rip off of Snow White's evil queen and her mirror, but no one seems to mind. Grunty captures the poor cub, and lures Banjo and Kazooie to her complex layer of traps and different realms forged only by Jiggies. She's far from mundane, as she's not only capable in creating worlds and enemies, but also specializes in magitech. As well as her hysterical, addictive, and sometimes gross rhymes that even Shantoto can blush over. I bet there's a death battle of them somewhere. Just as a tech expert, she excels in dark magic, even being risen from the dead, having her severed head live in eternal torment like Shinnok, and even combine both fronts in traveling through time. Damn, another chrono cackler. Hard to believe Grunty's been portrayed by a guy. I wish she would have gotten a chance in Smash Bros. Like her nemesis. Just another potential that can eliminate the Spotlight stealing squad. Her standoffish looks and mannerisms, her iconic zaniness, her persistence, her abilities in both magic and technology working harmoniously, and just being grandiose is enough to make it onto the top 5. Koume and Kotake, the Witch Sisters of Hyrule and one of the representations of Wicked. The wielders of fire and ice respectively reside in Gerudo Valley, particularly the Spirit Temple within the Desert Colossus. Ever since their debut in my favorite Zelda installment, they became the surrogate mothers of the Gerudo's future ruler Ganondorf. They've got every trait you'd expect for witches. Dark clothes and ancient etchings, black elemental abilities unwielding powerful fire and ice attacks including lava, casting hexing spells especially when brainwashing Nabooru for 7 years, and transforming her into an iron knuckle, always cackling a lot, teaching Ganon the ways of evil including unwielding the Triforce of Power, being elderly and skilled in their witchcrafts, and just being evil and intimidating. Even when being like Gotenks and merging into Twinrova. I'd already explained her somewhere in my boss's countdown, and they alone were very intrusive in my teenage mind. So much so that my autistic psyche hatched ideas crossing over with Pokémon, in which I'd use the legendary birds to assist Link against them. Might as well as give them a taste of their medicine, which is precisely the way to take them down. Please give Kebra Gevra some love. It's no question that Miyamoto has placed them as the last showdown to awaken the final sage out of Link's 6 temple expeditions. They can be quite intimidating since their attacks pack excruciatingly painful punches, especially if you're a novice. I'll take this pair as the signature witches rivaling Grunty, more so than potion entrepreneurs or cruise guides, old or young. At least their favoritism isn't once-in-a-century thing. The main Magikoopa, Kamek, takes flight to 3rd. A witch's list would just be incomplete without her. Ever since her debut in Super Mario World, mostly as cronies within castles for Lemmy and Larry, with the former within the Vanilla Dome, as their first creepy appearance. Those were just the Magic Koopas themselves, gathering in groups, churning supportive blocks into baddies, and wreaking havoc all over. But Kamek is a slightly different magical occurrence. This signature spellcaster debuted in the prequel Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, in which he partakes as Baby Bowser's caretaker and advisor. Even so, on to the present day. She and her species were ranked highly within Bowser and even Bowser Jr.'s armies. And she alone was responsible for attacking the stork and separating the Mario babies, commandeering the Toadies to abduct Mario from the Yoshis, and empower many puny enemies into chaotic bosses, even Bowser himself. Heck, Kamek can be just as persistent as Bowser, even just as skilled and dangerous. No wonder they're often compatible with each other, even up to the Illumination movie. Though I wished Kamek wasn't always so much of as a passive-aggressive and would calm Bowser more as a troubled infant, even giving him rides on Yoshi or on Kamek's broomstick. It's really weird how Kamek sounds very much like the doomed planet Namek in the DBZ series. I don't know if it was intentional or not. Much like Koopa Troopa, I feel awful on her rejection in the Mario Kart game starting with 64 and was replaced by DK. And I'd very much prefer her enhancements on her broomstick rather than just an awkward automobile for racing. Much as them in the Sonic racing games. Won't you rather stick with your guns? I would even have her as the nursemaid and Magic Koopas as paramedics to Bowser and his many cronies, rather than just offensive threats. At least that's how I see them when I was a tween, specifically when my mind went off the wall with my many Earthrealm defenders. The Koopas seem to hold up the most out of all of them. Despite the obvious stereotypes and counting the random eerie Magic Koopas, I consider them and Kamek as one of the earliest personal encounters of witches, despite being later than Mizrabel or the Little Witch. And she often functions as a secondary antagonist in the Yoshi series, so too as being Bowser's closest companion throughout his existence. So she's definitely qualified, especially for the bronze rank. Witches often grow into stereotypes, wielding magic often dark, wearing pointed hats and other opaque clothing, possessing items such as a cauldron or broomstick, always looking old and ugly which deflects their malevolency and corruption, or just a girl who's often intellectual even with mathematics. Oftentimes they don't go above and beyond these common spooky factors, and if they do, they're just too few and far in between. Even some, however, with these qualities can also manipulate time itself.
The new era begin.
The Time Witch is a unique concept, and aside from Ultimecia, who's mostly felt to be contrived, Chronica was actually the GOAT for me, especially in terms of Mortal Kombat. Now, I know most consumers were greatly disappointed as their expectations shattered when she was introduced, instead of being a war between Dark Raiden and the Revenant. However, due to the double whammy on X and 9 I experienced, and since I gave up for about 6 years, I wasn't really dissuaded. In fact, I find Kronika to be overhated and rather interesting. While 90% think she's a lousy retcon, it actually came full circle as she emerged after Shinnok's beheading and manipulating the Pantheon. Especially messing with Raiden's mind, giving him hallucinations of a fractured timeline. Just as a retarded rehash of the series.
Yeah, you keep telling me that. Who is she?
Kronika is the Titaness of Time, the original keeper, the first ever architect of history, and above all the ultimate manipulator of fate and the Pantheon itself, aside from being the mother of corruptive officials like Shinnok and Cetrion. Having an individual in Mortal Kombat originating from supernatural martial arts tournaments, controlling time, the heavenly figures, and shape our destinies by shifting the hourglass's sands behind the scenes can be quite intimidating. And also, with Jennifer Hale giving that shrill sci-fi voice, it definitely dictates her. She has done one hell of a job since she played Jessie Bannon in The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. Having the concept on restoring the new era might be as monotonous and prominent as X-Death's Void BS, but it was still compelling enough to stop her and prevent her endless wars. With the Revenants or no. She can be just as brainwashing as Mephiles, and her presence and voice always cuts the air. She might as well just be the love child of Ultimecia from Final Fantasy VIII, Damon from Reboot Season 4, and perhaps Solaris from Sonic 06. Her being an exclusive boss can be tricky, and I disagree completely on her being easy. Unless third time is literally the charm. She might as well have a similar playstyle to Kuja. And while she may be a last-minute ditch effort, we probably never would have had the badass Lord Liu Kang incepting. And just having Titan status, which is usually unknown and not often treaded, is quite a chilling decision.
Greek mythology, the Titans were greater even than the gods. They ruled their universe with absolute power. Well, that football field out there tonight, that's our universe. Let's rule it like Titans.
I don't necessarily consider every ending ever made to be canon, which was just an idea. But, like I said, there's potential. And so far, Kronika was the only Titan prescribed. There can just be the others as omnipotent as she is. But they don't dare to go there, do they? It's just like the lost potential with the fall of Edenia. Why not use Kronika twisting the Elder Gods' petty minds, convince the lower gods, and have her golden child also be a covert narcissist, and create tension? Hence Shinnok warring in the heavens, and have the rest be history. Minus Dominic's failed experiment, of course. Hell, do an improved MK Legends movie on that while you're at it. It's too bad she's never playable, unlike her kin, and her character's what mostly holds her back. Regardless, it's the fear of the unknown, the lost potential, the shrill chills she gives during her machinations of powerful beings, and life itself, even from behind the scenes. Her stunning presence, and just spawning a legacy of unrelenting darkness and vanity. She definitely deserves more praise, even more than the asinine Damashi, and it's no wonder she takes the silver over her son. Alright, we let 9 of the witches take flight and arise from obscurity. Before we present number 1, let's give the honorable and dishonorable mentions a chance to show off their cackling black magic spirit. Drakkhen and Delphox combined were the golden standards for all witches, as well as representatives of witch Pokémon. They're definitely talented Pokémon spellcasters through and through. Besides, Miss Magius would have been confusing on whether she should be classified as either a witch or a ghost. And being that I absolutely adore foxes, third next to dogs and the capybaras, they were certainly irresistible. At level 16, which is the usual level for a lot of starters, the cute kitsune evolves into Drakkhen, who uses a branch as magic sticks, casting out its more powerful and toned pyrokinesis, contrary to nibbling on twigs as snacks. Interestingly to note is that these branches are kept within her flame-resistant tail, and when one should draw it out, the friction helps the twig ignite, while returning it extinguishes the flame. If a Drakkhen loses its twig, they get very anxious and tepid, even to the point on never accepting a replacement, much as Flipbaby with her signature flower. These natural wands are just used as weapons, but communicates and also signals alert others if a Drakkhen's in danger. Much like any mid-level starter, Drakkhen is so-so. At level 36, she finally evolves into Delphox. They're the most stunning fire starters since the Cyndaquil line. Delphox tend to have a calm, collected personality, contrast to Fennekin's mood swings and Drakkhen's anxieties. They tend to be masters of their own craft, as they conjure psychic prowess to ignite their own torches and branch wands. A psychic fire type? Hell yeah! This is undoubtedly an incredible combination since Chandelure. They are indeed the pyro pros, even storing their makeshift weapons within their wrists beneath their own fur. This is certainly unique compared to the usual back quivers. They stare at their flames, which enhances their focus, see into the future, and makes them tranquil like meditation. And, combined with their sharp psychokinesis, they can create fiery vortexes reaching up to 5,400 degrees, incinerating their enemies. Kind of like deja vu to the storm supernova and containing force field on dealing with Dr. Doom on that regard. It may be weak physically, but it's quite the special wall, and is considered agile as the lightest starter ever. With all those impressive skills of pyromancy, it's no question why Delphox remains as the most popular choice for trainers beginning their Kalos Odyssey, even more than the Froakie line. Forget about Flint. He's ineffective and obsolete as a pyromancer compared to this fantastic Fennec. Have we even considered its own mega-evolved form? I won't necessarily consider Fennekin to be a witch, since she's pretty much just like a fox pup, and she was loosely based on the Fennec fox IRL, one of my favorite animals. So, her evolved forms are definitely more qualified, and I'm glad Serena managed to evolve her starter Pokemon into those levels. Whether battling or just coordinating, they'd certainly get the jobs done, and done well. Hell, there was even a Delphox from the Kalos Trainer OC that was a vital part during the war against the Red Dragons, even when climbing up the treacherous summit of Olympus Mons. The Fennekin line was just the first Kalos Pokemon I'd grown attached to, and both Drakkhen and Delphox are well worth it, both as witches and as default team members. With their opaque and majestic designs and their magnificent might. I'm the Ecron Rider, and both Drakkhen and Delphox are certainly the champions in witchcraft. with their pyromancy, psychokinesis, hexing, toxic talents, and incredible agility that can make up flight. And above all, grace and going beyond good or evil are what makes witches truly special. Thanks for watching, guys. Sorry I had to take this tangent detour. Life's been a downer lately, and I wasn't ready on tackling my Halloween Day of the Dead games. I shall resume my console game selections and, as promised, put together the finale to close out the year. Happy Halloween and Day of the Dead, everyone!